when I first arrived at Man City, there was no analytical capability. It was just me initially. I think when you build a squad, one of the lenses you probably have to use, it's like a portfolio, like a selection of stocks, shares, futures contracts, options. All these different derivatives and instruments are in a bundle. I think at one stage we had a team of it was 12 astrophysics master's students working for us. His argument to me was, you need to get as close to the grass as you can, because you're going to see things that you don't see from where you are now. The growth in these AI technologies has been exponential. So even though it's only 5 years from a calendar point of view, infrastructure-wise and compute-wise, it's a completely different world to what it was in 2019. Does the cost of the player equal, exceed, or sit below that value? Then you ask the question, say, well, okay, I'm going to bring a guy in, I'm going to pay him $1 million a year. How much does he need to play? At what level in our team? And what level does the team need to be in order to offset $1 million a year in exposure? I kind of made the kind of crazy decision to resign from probably one of the most desirable analytical jobs in world football and go and build something from scratch.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast, and today's guest is Lee Mooney. So Lee is a football financial strategist, data scientist and entrepreneur. He is the founder and managing director of Mud Analytics, a very interesting consultancy style business in the sort of scouting and recruitment space within elite football. So it's very, very interesting to hear Lee speak about that and how he actually founded that with Vincent Company. So as well as that and learning about what Lee is up to currently, we speak a little bit about what he got up to before setting up that business. And that included time working with Manchester City. So he joined Man City as a recruitment analyst lead, but then actually went on to head up their whole football insights department. So he has some great experiences working at the top level of the game. So before we get into the conversation, I want to quickly ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and a quick shout out to InPlay Online, who are a sponsor of this video, but more about those guys later. So without further ado, let's bring Lee into the conversation. Lee, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no,
Looking forward to it.
I'm interested to talk to you because I think maybe you said it yourself, you're not one to kind of post around your work, post stuff online, at least until recently. So I don't know too much about you. I know what you've done in your career and stuff in terms of where you've been.
Right.
That's about it. I don't know too much. And again, what you kind of currently got going on. So interested to speak about you. I'm sure there's other people listening that will also be keen to learn more about you, Lee. So what I will do is before I pass it over to you, I just want to read this. This is kind of from your LinkedIn profile, which I do have up. So this your kind of summary that you've given yourself. So football, financial strategist, data scientist and entrepreneur, MD at Mud Analytics, which we will come to, and chief architect of the Mud platform. So helping football clubs at all levels to win more and to do so more sustainably. So hopefully that gives the listeners a bit of an overview in terms of what your style is. So I will pass it over to you now, Lee. For those that don't know who you are or don't know much about you, give yourself a bit of an introduction if you can, please.
Yeah, sure. So where do we start? So I guess it's start from the beginning, right? So graduated from the business school in Manchester at UMIST, went to London, worked for Deloitte in London for 5 years as a management consultant, pretty much entirely in the kind of data and analytics space, but all very much in industry, right? So government departments, banks, insurance companies, some kind of consumer goods companies, things like that. So big companies, blue chip companies. Left Deloitte after 5 years, went and worked in Barclays as well. I did 5 years in Barclays in London, very much around, again, kind of the architecture around data, but also the use of it. So we had a really interesting team there that was doing like data-led design type work. And we worked on some really cool products like the Pingit payments app and the Barclays mobile banking and things like this. So that was really good. But football was this kind of hobby that was like bubbling in the background around that time. It was around this sort of, I'm trying to think now, 2010, 2011, 2012, where data was starting to become something that you could access. And people were starting to talk about football with this kind of data language. And it became this hobby of mine. So I was writing things on Twitter, and I was doing conferences talking about football when I was working in banking. It was really strange.
Yeah.
But around that time, Man City ran a kind of talent search type initiative. It was like a bit of an X Factor thing where they published some data and they said, have a go at it, right? Just do something, which is phenomenal, really, for a monster club like that to do something like that. Yeah. It was led by Gav Flegg and Ed Sully, actually, and Sam Wilson. And I was one of the guys that responded to that. Now, so the story goes, I think something like 10,000 people or there were 10,000 submissions. I don't know if it was 10,000 people or 10,000 submissions. And I guess I don't know whether they did it based on geography or what, but I managed to get to the top of that group of people. Started working at Man City and part-time initially. And to kind of make that work, I quit my job at Barclays and I set up as a independent consultant. I started to do contracting type work. Yeah. So I could move between when City wanted me and when I needed to make a living. So that's how I started. And then gradually that just grew. So City became a bigger and bigger part of my life. I went in full time. Then I joined the permanent staff. Initially, I think as recruitment analytics lead for Man City, and then that grew into a broader analytical responsibility across the club. And then as the group started to add more clubs to it, that responsibility just extended. Yeah. And what we ended up with was a kind of shared service analytics department that covered sports science and medical, performance analysis and recruitment for all the clubs in the group. Yeah. And then I left 2019 as a director, and I went down this kind of startup path. So the kind of trigger, a big chunk of that was, to be honest, I'd started to build this relationship with Vincent Kompany around 2017, maybe. I think he was studying a master's, as well as being the captain of Belgium and the captain of Man City. Pretty remarkable, really, when you think about it. But he was studying for a master's degree, and he kind of reached out into the club for help, support, content, these kinds of things. And I think I'd done a pretty good job of following through on that. And we just started to build a relationship. And then over time, he was like, do you think there's a business in this? Do you think there's something you could go and do? And my first daughter was, I think, 3 at the time, and we were pregnant with our second daughter. And I kind of didn't want to repeat what I'd done with my first daughter, which was kind of leaving the house before she was awake and getting back when she was in bed. Yeah. I did that for a really long time. So I thought, well, I'm nearly 40. I've got another baby coming. I don't want to miss what I missed with the first one. It's probably now or never to go and build something. So I kind of made the kind of crazy decision to resign from probably one of the most desirable analytical jobs in world football and go and build something from scratch. And then I think within 4 months, COVID arrived, something like this. So that was the kind of genesis of it. Was this kind of nudge from Vince, my age, my daughter, and all these other things. I thought, right, I'm going to go and create something. And then that's the process I've been on, or the journey I've been on ever since, this kind of startup journey. Yeah. So I've been doing that now for, this will be my 6th year of doing this. So it's a kind of mixture of software and consultancy. So do a lot of advisory work. In this kind of niche of football and finance, there's kind of a grey zone where these two things, they overlap beautifully. You'd be amazed if we could talk about it later, but how many performance problems have their roots in some kind of financial architecture issue. It's amazing. And you've got coaches being sacked because of effectively the capital structure of the club is wrong, or something like that. You can, when you chase it down to its absolute roots, that's what I found. More and more big structural things are like at the root of what people think are performance problems. They're not actually performance problems at all. Anyway, so sorry, I digressed there. But yeah, so I'm 6 years in. So I've done a lot of work with, and to be fair, I think I've worked now with probably 40 or 50 clubs in the last 6 years. Different levels of project, right? Some are very, very small. Some have been really meaty. But obviously the ones that, I try not to talk too much about specific clients, but obviously with the documentaries and stuff, it's clear I've been with Burnley for the last 3 seasons or so. And we've done some remarkable work there too. I think we've had 200-point promotions, 100+ point promotions with 2 different coaches. And in the Premier League season, which was obviously very difficult, we had over 100 million in player sales from a club that's in a town of 80,000 people. I don't think that's ever been done before. So they're pretty remarkable things. And there's obviously lots of other things that I'm doing with other clubs that I can't talk about as easily.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. I think, well, what you mentioned Burnley, Paul Jenkins has been on this quite recently as well. So I'll link that episode down below for anyone with the kind of Burnley interest. So a few things I want to jump into what you've mentioned there, Lee. So, because I had down to ask you about the that the Man City analytics scheme in terms of hiring. So
Oh yeah,
that was a question to see, was you part of that? Is that how you got in? So can
yeah.
you remember back then, Lee, what you did? You do like multiple submissions? Can you remember what kind of work you actually submitted to be able to be recognised at that time?
I think it was a mix. So I think one of the things that helped. So when I was debriefing it with Gav Flag, who's just gone in as CEO of Salford City, by the way, fantastic.
Yeah,
remarkable. He had a lot of work. So he basically turned up with like a thick document of stuff I'd produced, and I didn't even think about that. But I've been writing. I'd been writing for like a Liverpool fans magazine, called the Tompkins Times, which at the time was like it had some really cool people writing on it. Actually, it seemed to be a place where people who were thinking about the game and wanted to have really good quality conversation could get behind a paywall and just talk about it.
Yeah,
and it was only like a couple of pound a month or something like that. But Paul, who runs that, I'd written some sections for one of his books. I'd done a bunch of articles on his website. They were terrible. When you look back now, they're awful. But at the time, I felt like I was breaking ground.
Yeah.
They haven't all stood the test of time very well. But I think the thing that really helped was I was getting to a reasonably good position with no real investment. So I was able to use like really cheap, accessible data, public data, and then put all the effort into the creativity side and getting really close. And then I think a part of the reasoning for them being interested in me was, well, if this is what he can produce with essentially really poor raw material, what's he going to produce if we give him access to all the world's goodies? So that was a part of it. But when Gav turned up to debrief it, he had kind of abridged all of the things I'd written over the last 2-3 years, and it was all annotated, and it's incredible effort he'd gone to. So I think the submission definitely mattered, but I think I had a back catalogue as well that showed I was someone who thinks as well as someone who can compute things. And we went through all of that. So I think the submission itself was fairly straightforward. There was a bunch of work I think I did on goalkeepers in the Premier League. There was a bunch of work I did around kind of trying to quantify the contribution to outcomes of all the different measurements that existed. I think it was the Opta data set at the time. The aggregate one, it was the summary one, not the F24, it was the simpler one. And that gave this kind of really nice kind of scatter plot view of, what are the levers you try and pull if you want to win games, right? That kind of idea. And I'd just done it visually, and it was very clean and simple and very clear. So there was that, and then all the other stuff I'd written for TTT being dissected and broken down. I think that collection of stuff really helped. And I think that's still possibly the case now. I think anyone that's trying to get into this, it's harder than it was for me because these roles didn't exist. Man City didn't have somebody like me before I had that role. That's not the case now. So, but I think it's still important to have like a back catalogue of stuff that shows you've been thinking about this and working on it for an extended period of time. Because you need to show the graph as well.
Okay, so I hope you're enjoying the video so far, but I have a really quick interruption for anybody with an interest in video analysis. So if that's you, please do click the link down below the video for InPlay Online. So just to give a quick overview, because I think it'll be relevant to a lot of people that are watching this particular video. So InPlay Online is a cloud-based video analysis software. So it allows you to tag your videos, and when you've done your tagging, that includes adding labels, adding comments, adding notes and voice notes even, and you can even illustrate and draw over your clip. So if you are an aspiring analyst looking for your job and you want to create a portfolio of work, if you're a scout looking to make your kind of reports a little bit better and more animated, if you're a coach looking to get into analysis a little bit more, then this tool will be great for you because it starts at just £15 a month. So once you've done your analysis, you can add all the clips to different playlists, which can be downloaded and exported offline. You can put them into presentations and also share them to different people within your team. So it comes with a whole bunch of other features, but I'll let you click the link down below if you are interested. As I say, packages start at just £15 a month, so it's a very affordable solution if you are looking for something to help with your video analysis. So that's it for the interruption. Let's get back to the video. Yeah, no, definitely. That is definitely something we've spoken about on this channel before, and a lot of the guests have done something very similar where they have, whether it's posting on Twitter or whatever in the past, and they have that back catalogue as basically proof and evidence of their development throughout their journey so far. So yeah, definitely an important thing. I mean, in terms of, and I said to you before we started recording, I'm not a data analyst or a data scientist or anything. What would you, apart from technically now entrepreneur, what would you say you actually would classify yourself being? And if you can describe the differences between the likes of a data analyst, a data scientist, an engineer, an architect, like where do all these things overlap, and what are the differences basically?
Gosh, there's a lot to break down there. I find it very difficult actually, because I think I've got to an age and a level now where I quite like being able to move between different disciplines. So I probably spend my time in three big areas. So I think one is around financial modeling. Two is around scouting. So I spend a lot of time now just watching players and contributing qualitative views of players. So I spent a long time building those skills. I think those skills are super important, by the way. I think you've got to get as close as you can. So again, this is the influence of Vince, unfortunately. So his argument to me was, you need to get as close to the grass as you can, because you're going to see things that you don't see from where you are now. So you're going to see things about players, you're going to see things about coaching, how coaching is delivered, where the details are in terms of how you make something happen on the pitch. If you're far away in an office looking at spreadsheets, you're not going to get that. So he pushed me really hard to get into that side. And the trade-off was I would push him really hard to understand my work, right? And we end up with this kind of collaboration. So I've put a lot of energy over certainly the last 5 years to being as credible a judge of a player as I can be. And I think that's got to a really good level now. And I value that very highly. So that's sort of block one, block two. Block one's the financial modeling. Block three then is the analytical stuff. So, and the truth is, when you're in a startup phase or a startup type organization, you have to cover a lot of disciplines. So I'm really fortunate. I've got some really great guys that work for me. I've got some data engineers working with me. I've got fantastic data scientists. I've got a product developer who's full stack. And I've just hired as a sort of UI, UX brand designer person. So I sort of chip into all of those disciplines, but they run them for me. So, I think probably data scientist is probably the best category to stick me in.
Right.
But the truth is, I'm past that stage where I'm doing that as the majority of my day. But certainly driving, guiding, supporting, challenging a team of people. That's probably a better summary of more like an analytics director than a specific technical skill. But my technical skill set is very broad, and it needs to be.
Yeah, definitely.
So those three disciplines, I think I kind of rotate between those three all the time.
Yeah, that's also interesting, because again, that's also been mentioned in terms of getting closer to the grass and understanding the coaching side of things, and the fact that you brought, you and Vince from opposite sides together, and you both understood each other's worlds almost. Like that's really interesting to hear. I think we'll kind of go back to joining Man City in terms of you said yourself there, I think it was a recruitment analytics lead that you first joined as. And this is going back to 2014-ish or so, I think.
Yeah.
So it's over 10 years ago. So again, lots will have changed since then. So I'm just curious to know, when you joined that department, Lee, like what was it like? What was the size of the department? Were there many other analytics professionals in there? You mentioned Gavin and Ed and stuff like that. Like, what did the department look like at that time?
So there was a lot of people in the performance space or with a performance background. So I think Gavin had been head of performance analysis. Simon Wilson had been head of performance analysis, all at Premier League clubs. Ed Sully, they were all in amongst it, but they were all ultimately from a performance analysis background. When I first arrived at Man City, there was no analytical capability. It was just me initially, and we got a refurbished laptop from the IT team and did some work to help it stay alive. And what I would do, to be honest, for my first year or so, would chain this laptop to my desk because it took so long to do the work it needed to do. I would chain it to the desk at night, set it running, let it run overnight, and pick it up in the morning. And that's how it started, and then that was kind of your first landing on the beach kind of thing. And then we very quickly started to invest in high performance infrastructure and the kind of computing you need to do this stuff really well, the automation of all the data and so on, so that you basically have this kind of ready supply, very usable raw data available, integrated, kind of multi-source integrated, things like that. Reliable, so that you're not having to think about it too much. And then from there, we started to really scale up the model development type work. And I've carried on the same ethos to this day, really. So I try and reduce everything down to just understanding the, first of all, win probability. And then secondly, what drives that in any league, in every league, in fact. And then also what drives the volatility of that win probability. So how do you make the win probability rise? How do you make it less volatile?
Yeah.
Those two kind of big guiding questions. And then you go down to the next level and say, well, what drives your thinking there? And that's then about just core principles. So what I've tried to do for certainly the last 10 years is set about trying to find and prove the underlying sort of first principles, core principles of what drives what helps a team to win sustainably. And that has to be universal. So it doesn't really matter what level of football that the team is in. So for me to be excited about a principle, it has to be something that could work in the 4th division of China just as easily it could work at the top of the Premier League. So I'm looking for those big structural, fundamental things. And that's what I've done ever since. So the department started with just me. And then gradually we added some infrastructure. We brought in a whole bunch of different consultants and kind of on-demand type resources because we didn't have a budget at the time to scale the team up. So it started as just me, and then we would just onboard on-demand staff. And we did that for quite a while in all the different disciplines. Then we added Brian Prestige, who runs the department now. And still there. So it took it over after I left and has continued to run it till now. And they've really ramped up the team since then. But it stayed pretty small. So we could deploy dynamically maybe as many as 10 or 15 people purely around analytics. But in terms of permanent headcount, it was always very small. And then we just added the skills and the expertise we needed on an on-demand basis.
Yeah.
I think it really helps, right? There's so many analytical domains where to have real quality and specialism, if you hire somebody, they're never going to cover all those domains. So it's far better to go and get a really elite expert, bring them guys in, use them for what they need to do, and have that ongoing relationship. But you can throttle it up and throttle it down depending on the skills you need.
Yeah. I
think at one stage we had a team of I think it was 12 astrophysics master's students working for us.
Really? Wow.
In teams, and we had different working groups, working on slightly different problems. So you can scale up a lot with that kind of model. Whereas if you put your money down on permanent staff, it just makes it very difficult for you if you need to pivot.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, in terms of how it operated. In terms of then your main focuses at the time, then Lee, was that more around? Obviously, you went in as recruitment analytics lead. So were you mainly focusing on bringing players into the club? Was that kind of the focus of the whole analytics department back then? And it maybe still is, or what's changed potentially?
I think it changed. It changed once we brought in Brian. So Brian was fantastic in terms of he kind of man-marked all the sports science and medical to a really, really good level, and he'd done such great work at Bolton in the performance space and also in the sports science and medical space. It just seemed very natural. So very quickly I was like, well, he's no danger. So he was very close to those departments and delivered content to those departments in a way that I could never do. Because he'd been a performance analyst, he'd been on the ground, he'd put in the yards then that I hadn't done. So it would have been a really stupid thing for me to kind of get in his way or try and impose any kind of approach. I think the best thing to do when you've got great people is let them loose. And that kept me very much closer to the engineering and closer to the recruitment team. And anything where there was a kind of overlap into financial type modeling, I think I tended to stay closer to those things. So squad design, the inbound, like you say, the inbound work in terms of the recruitment that was done, and then the pricing of players, inbound and outbound. They were the big things I tended in terms of the things that I did hands-on top of the leadership stuff. They would be the things I was doing the most in terms of hands-on work, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. So then you joined as recruitment analytics lead. You then kind of moved to the position of head of football insights and then director of data insights and decision technology. So by the kind of last few months or so of your time there, Lee, what kind of things were you doing at the end then, different to what you started with in terms of that more senior position of decision technology, data insight?
So I think as the organisation grew rapidly, it became increasingly corporate. Felt a lot like it did when I was in the bank, to be fair.
Right.
And you have a degree of kind of diplomatic responsibility where you need to be in rooms, talking to people, meeting people, sponsors, partners, all kinds of other entities take up an increasingly large amount of your time. Yeah. But analytically, we were just starting to theorize about how we might work with artificial intelligence.
Okay.
I'd started to propose a whole bunch of methods and concepts that with you look fast forward to now, the technology is there to do it, but at the time it was kind of like we were kind of restricted by the technology of our time, if that makes sense.
So this was 2019. When was this, Lee?
This is sort of, yeah, so this is kind of, I'd say the last year or so. So around 2018, 2019.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, if you look at how the growth in these AI technologies has been exponential. So even though it's only 5 years from a calendar point of view, infrastructure-wise and compute-wise, it's a completely different world to what it was in 2019. Completely different. So we were just starting to theorize about how this might be done, and how we might do clever kind of game simulation type things and sort of decision simulation type things where the best example I can give is like, there's a reason that you train pilots in a simulator, right? There's reasons that there's a reason that you do all manner of very high risk things in a simulation environment, because there is no real tolerance for failure. And I think player recruitment in a football club, I'm not saying it's as extreme as running a nuclear reactor or flying a plane, right? But there isn't a lot of tolerance for failure. There's a lot at stake for the key decision makers, the coaches, and sort of the senior staff. We kind of live in an age now where you can be a sporting director brought in to manage the long term and be sacked in 6 months. Yeah. So, that kind of short term ethos is kind of creeping up the pyramid in terms of the hierarchy now. Yeah. You've got owners turning over now at the sort of speed that managers used to turn over at 30 years ago, right? It's incredible. We were starting to explore the possibility that you could create these simulation environments to run all kinds of different decisions and scenarios and possibilities and come up with really good probabilities. And if you can imagine, you're stood still now and you look out ahead of you and there's all these branching chains of possibility. How do you navigate those branches? What's the best path to take? So the idea was that we could build these kind of technologies to go in and test these different possibilities, but also test things that you can't test in the real world because it just makes no sense. Yeah. Like the counterfactual crazy stuff. Like, can we actually test a build up with this structure instead of that structure? You'd never do it in a game, but actually if we did play with 2 in that position and 1 out in here, what would that do dynamically to the spaces, and how would that work? So that's where I was just getting to. And we've done some really good proof of concepts. We've done some partnering with some really clever people in the astrophysics department at Manchester University. I started to meet people like David Sumter, who runs 12 now. And we'd started to explore some of these things. Just at that point then, you kind of handed it off and started my own path. But yeah, that's where we were getting to.
Yeah, interesting. David Sumter also been on the pod, so I'll link that one below for anyone that wants to hear about that one as well. So if we go now towards where the recruitment meets the kind of your background in kind of finance, Lee, really. Yeah. So I seen a piece that you did, I think it was with a Training Ground Guru maybe a couple of years ago, in terms of talent cost utilization. So I just wondering if you can maybe explain a little bit more about that maybe people didn't see that, and just what you meant by that, and if you can maybe give some examples.
Yeah, let me have a think. So the way I talked before about kind of core principles and how this kind of diagnostic framework that we've developed over the last, since I've done this job basically, and 12 years now. And one of the first elements is actually economics. So it's really interesting when you look at. I'm trying to think of a good story to weave in. I think when you build a squad, one of the lenses you probably have to use, and it's I think it's an underutilized lens, is it's like a portfolio, like a selection of stocks, shares, futures contracts, options. You know, all these different derivatives and instruments are in a bundle, and if you don't get that bundle right, the consequence of that then is that you don't have the right cash flows. And then once your cash flows dry up, you kind of, football is all about cash flows. Once your cash flows aren't right, you start to really struggle. Then your ability to make the moves you want to make is massively diminished. So I think people, when they're on the outside, they look at a club and say, why aren't they signing X player, or why aren't they doing, it's really obvious, so they should do that. It's like, well, actually it's because they can't. They've locked themselves strategically into a path where they can't make that deal happen because they can't sustain the cash flows. They can't make that deal happen and stay within PSR or whatever. So over the years, I've developed this framework for how we distribute the money and how we allocate it to different roles in the squad. And the whole point of that framework is it makes you very resilient to unforeseen events. So, we talked before a second ago about simulation. There are squad designs that can be extremely impactful but very high risk, where you load your money a certain way, and if everything goes your way, you're going to have a great time. I think the year Liverpool won the league, was it 2019-20?
Potentially, yeah.
If you look at how many players they used and how many minutes were shared amongst the players that they actually used, it was essentially a team of 13 or 14 players. They didn't really need to dip in to their second string. And if they had done that, if you look at the quality differential between their first group and their second group, it was quite large. So you can kind of put all your eggs in one basket, and if everything goes your way, you can get a result. But for me, they were very vulnerable, the way that they were set up. And actually, if they'd had a key injury to a couple of different players, it would have had a big impact on their ability to deploy quality. Whereas I think Man City's team at the time was far better constructed, and really should have won the league, I think, to be honest. I think looking back now, I think anyone would look at those two teams and say the same thing. Actually, that Man City team was just phenomenal. And Liverpool had to pull absolutely everything out of the bag to win that league. But I think they weren't really built to do it. And they got, I think, very lucky, actually, or very good and very lucky. They managed the load of their players brilliantly. And they clearly got very lucky with collision injuries and random events. So anyway, the long and the short of it is there's an architecture for how you can do this in such a way that you can manage the firepower that you deploy in your first group, but you also have the right allocation of resources towards your redundancy so that you can have sufficient quality in your redundancy and maintain a very stable output level. So what I was saying before about having that high win probability and also very low variation, it kind of links back to that. And it's daft to think of it, but there's a way to architect the squad in terms of how you allocate money to squad roles that has a direct impact on how your team then goes on and sustains a winning level. So that's what that is all about. So that piece of work that I shared on the TGG was just looking at specific teams in I think the Belgian league at the time, and looking how some of them were constructed and how they were able to do that. But you've got you're putting down a block of money to go and win. How much of that money is getting on the pitch? So one of the clubs I worked for, when we first arrived, they were running about 25% utilization of their annual cost. So you take all the salaries and the annual player costs, the amortization of their transfer fees, you bundle it all into a pot and say, right, we're spending 100 million on this group of players. They were deploying about 20 and they were essentially burning 80.
So when you say, is that injured players that didn't play, is that what you mean by that?
Exactly, yeah. They'd spent a lot of money on guys who couldn't get on the pitch because they weren't good enough. Couldn't get on the pitch because they weren't available, they were injured, they were unfit or not in the right condition. Squad was too big, all these factors. So about 80% of their total spend that firepower was allocated towards redundancy, and 20% was actually on the pitch. By the time we left it, we'd flipped that ratio around to about 45%. 45% is about average in the Premier League, I think, because Premier League teams will play in multiple competitions. They need quite a lot of redundancy, especially with European campaigns as well. But like a club like Burnley, for example, certainly under the previous ownership, they ran it so tight. Burnley would run at something like 55 or even 60% utilisation in the Premier League, which is unheard of. Very, very high. If you go to MLS is completely different. MLS 60 would be poor. And the MLS clubs have really high utilisation of their payrolls and their cost base. So the football culture in Europe is different. But if you think of it in terms of just this is what you're deploying as a business to go and fund the ability to win, how much of that is actually hitting the road? That's what the utilisation concept was all about.
No, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So, and I've never heard it when you described it as like almost like a stock portfolio as well. That was quite interesting in terms of how you balance the squad and you build it up. So, is there any teams, maybe you can't answer, I don't know, but any teams like currently now, Lee, that you feel like are very good at that, like they allocate their money very well? Maybe some English clubs that the people will know of that do get a lot of bang for the buck and a lot of their spend is going on the pitch.
Yeah, the obvious ones are the Brightons and Brentfords of this world, right? Who's very, very slick in terms of how they have organised this stuff historically. I think Liverpool are very, very smart with this. Certainly for the last couple of seasons that I was there, and then for maybe the next few after, Man City did this really, really well. So there's a few that do it really well.
So did you say there's like an optimum, like if you go too high, is that too high of a risk, or would it be to get that number as high as possible, that kind of utilisation?
No, it's exactly as you describe it. You can be too high and too low, and both of those are damaging. You need to be in this kind of Goldilocks zone between the two. You want as much firepower deployed into your sort of tier one starting group as you can, but also have enough redundancy. If you overcook it on one side, you're vulnerable. If you overcook it on the other side, you're just as vulnerable. But you're vulnerable in different ways. On the one side, your vulnerability is your ability to go and win games because you've put too much money into your redundancy. On the other side, it's your vulnerability to unexpected things happening to that starting group. That means you have to use your redundancy when you really don't want to because it's not very strong.
Interesting.
So it's that sweet spot between the two. But I think Brighton do it really well. I think Brentford have historically done it brilliantly. I think Bournemouth have been quite smart as well from memory. It's a shame actually. I could have prepped if I'd known you were going to ask me that. I'd have prepped it for you. I'd have shown you. But we track this. So the infrastructure that we've built within the mud business, we actually have feeds of data covering hundreds and hundreds of leagues, and we track this for everybody. We've got a financial feed as well, so we track all the accounts for all the different clubs around the world, and that just gives us this really good sense of who's running very, very well and who's not.
Okay, so if you've made it this far into the video, you must be enjoying the content. Either that or you have simply fallen asleep. So whichever one of them it is, you probably won't mind me asking you for a quick favour. So as you know, I'm always looking to grow the channel. So the bigger the channel gets, the more people we can reach and impact, but also the bigger and better guests we can invite onto the channel to have these types of chats. So with that in mind, if you haven't already done so, I would very much appreciate it if you did hit the subscribe button down below the video. The stats are showing around 25% of viewers are subscribed. So there's a big chunk of you that are watching the videos, but you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, but I will let you off because you can do it right now. It's free and it literally takes 1 second. So if you go down, click the subscribe button, it would mean a lot to the channel and help the channel to grow. So that's all for now. Let's get back to the video. So specifically then on risk, I suppose, like obviously every decision, any decision comes with some amount of risk, and obviously bringing a player in is something that definitely comes with risk, and that can be you bringing them in domestically, you bringing them overseas, you bring a young player and older. So how do you kind of, when you're building squads, how do you kind of think about risk, maybe risks that people maybe don't realise are there in terms of like basically building squads?
It's a good question, right? So I think I think about risk. My first thought when you're asking that question is I think about pricing. So you can price whatever the risk is, you can price it and make it justifiable, if that makes sense. So, but I think the simplest guiding principle I can share is I think about asymmetry. a lot. Yeah. So, and it's a principle. It's one that I took from Nassim Taleb. But it's this idea that your downside should be known and absorbable, and your upside can be anything and potentially unlimited.
Yeah.
So you're looking for that asymmetric profile where it's like, if the shit hits the fan and this goes completely wrong, can we survive it? Can this business, this football club that lives within this business, can it survive this issue? Worst case scenario, player breaks their leg, they're out for the whole duration of their contract, we've got no insurance, like the full, like imagine like doomsday.
Yeah.
Can we survive that doomsday with this transaction? If we can, and then that's the first question, is a yes or a no. Then the second part is, does that player have that growth profile where we could potentially see a yield in the future that's higher than where we stand now?
Yeah.
And I tend to try and look for that profile. It's not always possible. Sometimes you deliberately take an older player where the growth isn't there. It's purely about what they're going to give you on the pitch.
Yeah.
And again, your pricing saying, well, at this cost, does that player give you the yield that justifies their cost? And you can do this really simply. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. We obviously do it in an extremely sophisticated way, but there are kind of cheap, fast versions of this in terms of the time you spend on the field has a value at different levels in every league. Does the cost of the player equal, exceed, or sit below that value? And then you ask the question, say, well, okay, I'm going to bring a guy in, I'm going to pay him $1 million a year. How much does he need to play at what level in our team? And what level does the team need to be in order to offset $1 million a year in exposure?
Yeah, I see.
So you say, right, well, he needs to play 90% of the minutes. Shit, okay. So at 90% of the minutes, can that guy deliver 90% of our minutes? Well, in the championship, that's a 46-game season. This player's got high volatility in terms of their game load capacity. We think he's only going to give us 50% of the minutes.
Yeah.
Well, he needs to play 90 to break even. We only think he's going to give us 50. What are we going to do now? You can very quickly start to see there's a disconnect between the cost of the player, the expected yield, and reconciling those two things, right? The cost and the expected yield. Yeah. And that's fairly simple mechanical methods, right? It's how much game load capacity do they have? How much match availability do they have? Do they have the physical profile to sustain that amount of game load at this level of league, for example? And then you can very quickly come to a conclusion what your probabilities are. And then it's a case of saying, well, on balance then, given these inputs and this, and we know what the cost is, we think our expected yield on this play is going to be X, right? You either then sign up to that risk or the variation around it, or you don't. But you can reduce it right down. And that's how I do a lot of that kind of work.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. So we've touched a little bit already in terms of kind of forecasting and predictive analysis. I had that down as a topic just to jump into a little bit more, Lee. So one previous guest I had on, I mean, I don't know if you know him, but James Young, who was at Sunderland in terms of in the So when we get to the end, I might ask you the same question as well in terms of at the end. I kind of asked him about what his predictions were looking forward, and he said his prediction was that clubs will do more predictions in terms of more predictive analysis and kind of that forecasting looking forward. So can you basically break it down to the layman in terms of what does that actually mean in terms of what data you're actually using? What are you forecasting, and why would you do this sort of thing?
Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So if we go back, if we start from the principles and build up. So the core principles that I work to are first of all around economics. We talked about that a little bit, and we've kind of added some colour to it. The next one is around the balance of the squad, this very specific construct of the squad. Then we have other principles around quality, goal threat, robustness, physicality, cohesion. I think that's all of them, of the group. Yeah. So I use that as a diagnostic framework, first of all. So I can go into any club in the world and step through those layers analytically, understand where they are, understand what their potential is in terms of where they could get to, how much is left on the table. Yeah. And start to suggest how to get from A to B. So this is where you are. This is how much you're leaving on the table. We think theoretically, without changing your capital composition or how you're funded, you can get, if you optimize all the different elements, you can get from there to there. After that, it's going to be about money. We're going to have to put more money on the table or generate it through player trading in some form. But this is your natural size. This is where we think we can go. In terms of predictions, you want to be able to predict essentially all of those elements.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to predict how your cash flows are going to change over time. You want to be able to predict how the kind of value of your portfolio is going to change over time. So are we sat on a stock of players that's going to grow in value and we can realize some of that value to fund our growth? Or are we sat on a stock of players that's going to decay in value and we're going to need to get new capital from our ownership year 2, year 3, year 4 to keep this thing at the level that it's at, right? So you want to forecast that. You want to forecast the quality profile of every player. Like, are they flat? Are they declining? Have they got a future where they're going to grow and be more valuable? Increased quality means increased win probability. So do we think we're going to get stronger with this group of players? Goal threat's kind of the same concept, but specifically looking at the ability of the team to create and score with the profiles that it has. Game load capacity we talked about a second ago. If I sign this player today, is he going to be available for 40% of our games, 80% of our games? Can they handle, if you're a Premier League team that gets relegated, can they handle championship game load where you're playing Saturday, Tuesday, and it's 46 games and it's pretty intense? These kinds of questions, you want to be able to, again, sort of as much as possible, forecast, anticipate, simulate, and then quantify the risk and then price it when you're making a decision. So each one of those principles, you would want to forecast all of those things. The cohesion of the group, cohesion is a little different. It's probably my least developed concept. But the idea here is that the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, in that when there are really good connections and there's a really good blend in terms of the psychological profile of all the different players, you can turn 100 into 110 without spending any more money because you can leverage that cohesion. You can also destroy the cohesion by ripping your team up and making massive changes, or sometimes just taking out a key player. Some players sit completely separate to their performance impact. They sit in a kind of cohesive hub role where they're really, really important to the performance of everyone around them, which is crazy, right? So you start to analyze it and go, wait a second, that guy there doesn't really play. It kind of contradicts everything I said before, right? Doesn't really play. It's fairly expensive. Doesn't score. Why are we persisting with this player, right? We need someone who's going to have an impact, but actually their impact is completely separate and massive. So you need to be able to make sure that you're valuing all these different elements and also predicting where that's going to go. Good example might be if you add a player. Give you a scenario, we've got a squad of players. We're going to take 3 guys out because their contracts have expired. We're going to put 3 guys back in. Which of the 3 guys that we put in has the most positive impact on our cohesion? Or is there a candidate we could put in there that could destroy the cohesion because of the nature of their profile? And have the opposite effect where you take 100 and turn it into 90 because you've got the composition of the squad wrong. So again, you want to be able to predict in advance as best as you can. Is that move going to make us stronger, short-term, long-term? Is it going to make us, football-wise? Or is that move going to make us stronger, short-term, long-term, financially? So I think a lot of stuff can be summarized in terms of a kind of matrix of football impact, financial impact, short-term, long-term. But I think that, does that answer the question?
No, definitely. Yeah. I think the cohesion is a very interesting one, and it leads me, because in terms of other things that other player attributes that maybe, the question would be, can they be quantified? Like in terms of a player's leadership, work ethic, mental resilience, like all of those types of things are going to be a determining factor if they're going to be a successful transfer. Like, how do you think about those types of things, Lee, that aren't a stat on that you can get into?
Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Some of that stuff is genuinely really hard. So because you're really saying is a lot of it's measurable actually. And I've been really lucky to work with some brilliant people who do research in that area and have got really good assets. So once you've got the player, there's a lot you can do to understand those dynamic properties that they have and their influence and all that kind of stuff, quantifiably as well, which is fantastic. But knowing that after you've bought them is a bit like closing the stable door after the horse has already bolted, right? So one of the kind of holy grails is, can you do this in advance of signing the player? And at the moment, I don't know how close you can get yet. Like I said, it's probably my least developed area because it's so hard to. I think we will get there. I think there's an analytical path forward where we can anticipate the impact of a player's cohesiveness on a group.
Yeah.
Day one.
Yeah.
And also the trajectory of it based on what else is in the group. So there are definitely things, if you've got a predominantly British group and you bring a player in from an environment where the cultural distance is quite large between where they're from and Britain, sense of humour and things like this, like in some cultures, standard British behaviour will be seen as bullying, right? Yeah. That's the truth. Yeah. So you can create these situations where the cultural distance is quite wide and the players then have a massive adaptation gap to their group. And the group also has, because they're collectively closer, the probability that they will then consume that player and that player will become part of that ecosystem is also very low. Yeah. So there are things like that we can do proactively from a distance. And what's beautiful with a lot of the work that we do is we have so much history. We can start to model all these different moves. So there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of movements where players have gone from one country to another at whatever age, with whatever background. And we can start to understand how quickly do they adapt and integrate and become performant in their new setting. There's a lot to deal with in terms of changing levels and things like that. But there's definitely the means to test it. And once you can start to test it, you can prove it. And then from there, you can understand how it fits into the puzzle.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, so obviously Man City are part of a multi-club ownership group and there's many more that are springing up and emerging. I mean, what kind of effect is that model having on recruitment? Because, if you just look at the players that Man City could bring in, if it's just for their first team, that's a tiny, tiny pool of the market. But if they've got all these other clubs and they're using like a player trading model, it opens up to a lot more opportunity. So yeah, just a little bit around kind of MCOs, if you can, and how you think about them and how they've affected kind of recruitment strategies.
Yeah, no. So I've got a kind of mixed relationship with them, right? So part of me really likes them. So if you get the vertical integration aspect of it right. So I keep thinking, the one I always think of that I really like is the whole, and if you go into Germany and Austria, there's a different narrative. But from a distance, I look and go, Liefering, Salzburg, Leipzig, B team, Leipzig, that kind of chain. Yeah. They've got fairly close geographic proximity. The hierarchical steps between the levels are quite nicely organised. The registration rules allow you to deregister and re-register and move players around a little bit, B team, first team, etc., which is great for like their exposure and everything else. So you can see how you could start to create your own kind of vertically integrated pipeline of talent where you take a player into Leaf. I'm going to use Austria and Leaf. I've got no relationship, by the way, with these people. I'm just using them for the story. But you can take a player into Liefering at 17. You can give them game time exposure. You can train them in your model. You can test them. You can understand a lot of the unknowns that you can't make them unknown. You can't make the unknowns known until they're your player. Yeah. You can deal with a lot of that when it's earlier and cheaper in that stage of the hierarchy, and then progress them up to the next stage of development. And that development journey can carry on all the way through. Even if the clubs are kind of independently run, if they've got the same kind of ideas, they can have a continuous kind of development plan and pathway for the player, which I think is fantastic. For the player, think of it purely from a player's point of view. It's a really cool thing. You've got an opportunity, you've got a structured development model, you've got people at each level in the hierarchy looking at the level below. There's lots of positives to that kind of construct, I think, for a player. For the clubs themselves, that vertical integration also means actually you may be less vulnerable to the kind of extremes of the transfer market, because you've got a very strong pipeline of talent that you can leverage in all kinds of different ways, and you can trade internally, right? So you can do kind of deals where you move a guy from Salzburg to Leipzig, and lots of players have made that move. Maybe the market rate for that move is 40 million, but they do it in a different way, right? And as clubs become more regulated, managing some of that margin could be a way for smaller clubs with smaller budgets to maybe punch above their weight a little bit, because they can take that off the table and put it into their own team. Things like that. So I really like that. That aspect of MCO, I think it's really cool. The bit I don't, what do I not like? So the bit I don't like is when I think there's an element to it as a football person. I think of myself as a football person now too. There's a kind of identity politics type aspect to it that I find difficult, where clubs want to be autonomous. They've all got their own fans. Everyone wants their club to go and do the best it can for itself and to win. And to be thought of as part of a value chain is not going to get anyone happy, right? It's not going to arouse anybody. So, my club is now a feeder for another, instead of being a thing on its own, with its own ambition and its own vision and its own drive. So, if you're immediately in that value chain, you're probably skewed towards a different profile of player. Maybe your squad is younger now. So the balance that we talked about before skews more towards the developmental age ranges. So that you have fewer senior players, which means your immediate ability to go and win is reduced. Things like this. Why would you want that? The reverse is also true, right? You can see very high quality players going into partner clubs, MCO partner clubs, with big parent clubs that elevate the level of those teams as well. So it doesn't always have to be something that needs to be handled with hostility. I think it can also be something that's very productive. But I guess it really depends on the cultures, whether they fit together. But there is a whole element to it, this kind of human trafficking type aspect to it, which I find a little uneasy. But I think if you've got good people in the clubs and they all want the best for the whole and for each individual entity, I think it can all kind of coexist quite happily. I just think football clubs generally are quite complex psychological environments. So the conditions to get that kind of collaboration to happen are quite hard to create. So you need fantastic leadership. You need really visionary people who can get people to engage and stay engaged in a project. But very easy to eat them alive with a kind of short-term micro view of your particular entity in the overall system. So there's like lots of things in life, right? I mean, I was talking to someone the other day about one of my clients before I was in football at the same time, but one of my non-football clients, they used me for an architecture project, a data architecture project. And one of my slides, I actually went and took a photograph of the fridge. So I went into the canteen area, the kind of coffee making area, and there's a sort of 7-8 foot fridge, and it was full of milk with people's names on. That was all out of date and stinking. And I was like, if we can't share milk, how the hell do we share infrastructure and resources? And how are we going to architect this thing? If everyone's going to want that one of their own, it's going to look like the fridge, So, some cultures are going to be more conducive to this kind of collaboration than others. But yeah, so I thought that's an interesting story, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I want to now touch upon a little bit for other clubs. So you've worked at Man City, which is obviously one of the kind of richest clubs in the world. And people will be watching this that maybe work in lesser clubs with no budgets, but they want to start to integrate and lean on data a little bit more, but they might not. Because I almost feel like there's a skills gap where, the analyst in the club might be more of a performance analyst rather than a data analyst. So they don't actually know who they need to hire or what kind of skills they need to look for. And then that's, I suppose, where consultancies come in as well, where you can lean on either full-time or consultancy. So just to kind of, for anyone listening that's in let's say a League Two club, and they want to start leaning on data more, is there any tips and advice or things to think about for those kind of people?
So I do a lot of lower league work. And for that reason, to be honest, lower league in terms of, so you can work at top divisions which are low quality, but they're still pretty well resourced. They've got some capability. But what you're talking about is a different setting, right? So they're much smaller businesses. So, and it is tough. It is tough. So you look at a framework of principles and you're saying, well, I can't apply that one. I can't apply that one. Not because they don't apply to the setting, because they do, but because the infrastructure isn't there, the staffing isn't there, the skills aren't there. So you're trying to find a way to reposition those principles so you can execute them at the lower level club. What I tend to find, to be honest, is there's some things that are extremely applicable and universal, even at lower budget settings. So all the stuff we talked about, the economics, the financial utilization, the capacity of the P&Ls to sustain a squad, the distribution of the money across the squad design, doesn't matter how big your club is, that's there for you to take. And that's huge. So a lot of the time I start there, because that's something you can come in as a consultant, you can work with the finance person, because there'll be one, an accountant, whatever. You can work with somebody on the club who has a leadership position. You can get a team together in any club and tackle that project and give a framework. Then you go to your sort of next stage then, which is around the squad design. Squad design is completely universal. So again, it's advisory work. You bring in someone like myself who can help you step through it, give you some tools. You leave, consultant leaves because you can't afford to keep them forever. And you can progress some of those principles. And I think a lot of lower league work has that kind of vibe. I think the thing that's the most difficult is there aren't necessarily people in those clubs who know how to buy those services as well. So that's really tricky. So, you know, a lot of the stuff that I've done now is more kind of exec advisory. So at that level of club, you're actually saying, look, there's 101 different providers that do this. But for your context and your setting, based on the years that I've had in this business, they're the 2 or 3 or 4 you should have a really good look at. The rest of them are just Me Too kind of noise that you can just avoid. These 3 or 4 are going to take you to another level, and then help with the onboarding and the integration and so on. So I think that's a pattern. I mean, I'm kind of giving you examples of where what's happening to me in those settings, I guess. But generally speaking, you're taking something, you know, to answer your question kind of succinctly, at that level, you're taking stuff off the shelf, mostly. And it's about the processes you build internally, rather than having a big analytical lever to improve. So a lot of my methods and models that we've developed over the years, they're designed to be kind of level agnostic. Some of the data just doesn't exist in the lower leagues. If you take spatial tracking, for example, and sort of physical data derivation from broadcast footage, when the stadiums are of a certain size, the angles aren't good and you can't create that footage, you can't create that data. So you can't do scouting with that kind of data in League Two. You know, but you know, once you get to League One and above, it starts to become active. So you can have a roadmap where you can say to the clubs, look, these are the things we're going to do at this level. If we go to that level, we'll add these elements. If we go to that level, we'll add these elements, and you can actually map it out. So there's that. But yeah, I think that would be my conclusion. I think at those kind of levels, you can't afford to license huge amounts of data. You probably can't afford a permanent staff base. I mean, just to have somebody to do data engineering, infrastructure, automation, just platform health, you know, platform health, just keeping your raw data fit and healthy to use. It's pretty expensive and probably beyond the reach of a League Two club. Because bearing in mind, you untap all this data, especially in recruitment, say, and it's going to generate lists of players that you're going to have to watch, you know, to follow through, right? So it's going to put more staff pressure on your scouting and your recruitment type departments. So what's the point? What's the point of feeding your organization with data and insight and direction if you can't go and execute any of it?
That's a good point.
So I think I've got this with another client at the minute. We're trying to talk through how to approach this, and I said you've got to strike the balance, because there's ultimately decisions that need to get made, and there's tasks and things that need to happen in the other domains, like from scouts and from coaches and from other people. What capacity do you have? And then let's try and manage the pipeline of stimulus to match the capacity. So there's no point building like Liverpool, Man City level pipeline if you're going to try and force it down to a part-time, you know, 10 hours a week capacity. It's just pointless, right? So I think I try and work from the decisions backwards, I guess, and the capacity backwards rather than bottom up. But generally speaking, to answer your question, I think strategically that's the right approach, is to think about capacity and work backwards. And then in terms of execution, you're probably very skillfully and carefully buying help and support from these kinds of consultancy type businesses that can essentially spread the cost over lots of clients that you can't afford within League Two on your own. I think that's probably the most coherent answer I can give you, I think.
No, that's useful. So then, I suppose more now on mud analytics, then, Lee, in terms of what types of thing. I mean, you've kind of touched upon things already, but like what type of clients do you have? You don't have to name them specifically, but are you
Yeah.
engaging with like sporting directors, heads of performance, and owners and things? And do you offer? Is it consultancy? Do you also have like a platform or something? Like, what is it that you're actually kind of doing and engaging clubs with?
Yeah. So in terms of kind of stakeholders, there's obviously the ownership level stakeholders, and I think we've got stories and narratives that sing to them, right? Which is all of this financial architecture stuff, the amortization, the payroll, utilization of the financial resources, trying to limit the amount of exposure they have to repeated capital calls, things like that. So if you're an owner, you're going to hear that and go, that's the business. I need some of that.
Yeah.
You go down a level, and you start looking, say, at sporting directors, coaches, heads of recruitment. That's a more difficult domain, to be honest, to operate in. Some of my best relationships are with coaches, but I don't know how they came about. Like, you know, but when there's a really good connection with a head coach profile, the stuff that's possible is so much more.
Yeah.
Because they're such important figures and they're such key leaders inside the organization. Even if they're not hierarchically at the top, they're super important. So if they're with you, what's possible becomes so much more. It's just a whole world just opens up, which is brilliant. Sporting directors, I think there's a kind of dynamic, I think, between sporting directors, coaches, and owners, which is a really interesting one. And we're doing a summit, actually. I'm going to little plug. We're doing a summit with VSI in September to talk about that and understand how the role that AI and analytics can play and hopefully facilitating that dynamic between those stakeholders. But I think for me personally, it's quite a challenge, actually, because you're putting a lot of stuff on the table, which I think if you're an insecure sporting director, you look at that and go, I want that guy as far away from me as possible. He's talking to my owner about things I don't understand, and he's bringing processes and methods and tools that are different to how I see the game or how I see the world. So that's quite a tricky dynamic. But when I've got a really good connection with one, then it's like giving them a sat nav. It's like you're just supercharging them, and you can really give them a lot of power and a lot of impact. So I think you've got to find somebody who's got at least some analytical edge to how they think. And they're comfortable being in that uncomfortable space where you've got to understand how the various models and things work.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of guys who've come up through that kind of traditional player scouting route, it's very hard to find that in them. But a lot of the other guys that I've worked with who've come from a kind of performance analysis route, and they're starting now to get into senior positions, it's very easy for them to have that kind of conversation. They are very secure. They understand what they're trying to do. And they can take that stuff on board. So I think ownership, coaches, sporting directors, there's a kind of proposition for each of them. And then what we do with Mud is, at the moment, it's predominantly consultancy work. We have a software platform that if anybody who wants to try and tackle something difficult, try and build a software platform.
I know.
It's insanely difficult to do. We're currently now in the complete redesign and rebuild of our third software platform. And I've not put any of them in the market at mass yet because I've not been happy with the functionality and the styling and all the little elements that you need to hit the market and really fly. So we're in the middle of redesigning and rebuilding our software platform.
Cool.
So there's a software side to the business, which is essentially trying to facilitate the scouting process. So what you'll see in lots of places is like this kind of demilitarized zone that sits between scouting and analytics. And I've always hated that. So what I've tried to do is design the software in such a way that the analytics just sits passively in the background. It's super advanced, but it's not in your face. Doesn't make anyone feel stupid. It's not confronting really in terms of how it's positioned. It just sits there very quietly. And then the scouting team then can operate on top of it. And they have a constant kind of, it's like, what I'm trying to do is position it so that it's like an assistant to them. So they have the most incredible personal assistant, but they just do the job almost the way they've always done it. And there's the checks and the balances and the guidance and the support from the software, financially as well as football. So all the financial modelling is in there, all of the football modelling is in there. And then they can just work, just discovering and processing players at high speed. So that's the kind of interaction we're trying to facilitate. Whereas I think what a lot of other platforms are doing is they kind of give you the ability to either, if you know what you're looking for, you can go and find it, right? So if you're looking for a player with a specific type of XG or a specific type of whatever, you can go in their platform, move some dials, find a list of players, and generate some pictures.
Yeah.
What we've tried to do is go one step further and say, well, that's great, but you shouldn't have a guy in the Saudi Arabian third division next to Alexander Isak, because they've both got high XG, because one of them is doing it in a league that's very weak and another one's doing it in the best league in the world. So we do a lot of work on the kind of enrichment of the data so that the pool of players that you surface them as quickly as possible with as few clicks as possible, but they're as relevant for you as they can possibly be for your club, your context, your situation. And that's what I've tried to do with that. And to be fair, where we've deployed it, and I've been there to kind of babysit the in the early stages, we've got really good results, like insane results, to be fair. And I think the challenge for me is how can I get more into the software so that I don't have to physically be there to support and guide and lead and connect people. And I don't know if it's possible. I don't even know if it's possible in software yet to do that. We're going to find out. But we're going to try and find out whether they're going to succeed or fail, obviously. But just to create that environment where the software facilitates really good conversations and a really thoughtful, respectful debate about the strengths and weaknesses of a profile and how that player is going to help us grow. And so all the things we've spoken about today, some of the simulation capabilities we've talked about, they're going to go in the software. So we're going to have the ability to build a squad, take a player out, and look at the optimized profile to fill that void based on the cohesion, based on the financials, based on all the other elements that we've seen. We're actually going to consider all that and say, here's a list of 10 players ranked based on their most likely outcome relative to the defined context. So we're going to solve that analytically. I've committed to do that. And then also put that into a league table context and say, if we make that change, we increase our chances of finishing our chance of winning the league goes from 15% to 25% if we make those changes. Or we can afford those changes and they give us an extra 5% chance of staying in the division. Whatever the problem space is, try and bring it back to those big fundamental things about the impact on winning and what that means for your league context. So the consultancy side is diverse, covers all the different things we spoke about today. And we've had a lot of fun doing that, to be fair. And then the software side is ultimately the future of the business in terms of every lesson we learn, every pain point we go through, adding that into the software in a way that helps. Your example before, right? I picture somebody in League Two under enormous pressure on their own, trying to help this team grow with X thousand people in the stadium screaming how shit they are. I just try and picture somebody suffering and go, like, can I build something for them? And then where by working with them and they work with our software or they work with me or whatever the team, they're going to get out of that painful place and into a better place. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing better than being stood on a pitch, lifting a trophy or doing a lap of honour with the staff after you've done something fantastic, And I've been really lucky in my career to have done that a few times now. And you want as many people in the world as possible to get that feeling, So that's what I'd like to do. But yeah, so that's I don't know if I've gone off track a little bit there.
No, that's cool. I didn't know too much about what you're actually doing there, Lee, so that was useful. I mean, what we'll jump to next is I wanted to kind of go through some of your recent posts that you put on LinkedIn, so over the last few weeks or so. So I don't know about you, but LinkedIn's pretty full of some rubbish on there, but there's some good stuff in amongst it, and there's lots of people that have worked in really interesting positions that are willing to share their experiences and stuff. So I've got 8 down here that you've put out, and if we can, maybe jump into a couple of them and maybe kind of expand on them. And these are kind of lessons that you've mentioned that you've learned over your 20-year career or so. So so number 1, I'm just going to go through them firstly. So number 1, keep stupid out. Number 2, no emotional decisions. Number 3, always evolve and build. Number 4, centralize intent, decentralize execution. 5, fail fast, fail cheap, fail often. 6, build bottom up, not top down. 7, all great truths begin as blasphemy. And number 8, no insight is sacred, only searching. So
nice.
I'll let you choose. Like, you can go, do you want to maybe pick a couple that we can jump into, maybe give some examples of what you mean by them? I'll let you choose whichever one you want to riff on.
Yeah, so I've been a ghost for years and years and years, right? Not just because I look like a ghost, but I've the summer's the worst time for me, man. I'm not built to go outside, and I've just distracted myself there. But I've been a ghost in terms of public profile for a long time. So I didn't really do when I was at Man City. I didn't really do anything publicly. Didn't want to. I was too busy, to be fair. Other than things from within the club's ecosystem, so with partner clubs and with sponsors and so on, but never really in the public domain. Didn't feel the need. We did the Amazon Prime all or nothing thing. I'm in it for about 2 seconds.
I didn't actually know. Yeah.
So I've kept a low profile deliberately for a long time, and then I did a talk at VSI, and Tony Faulkner actually is the CEO of it. It's just like, Lee, what are you doing? Like, why have you chosen to hide from the world all of these thoughts and all of these stories and all of these and you should be out there talking about it and opening your network more, be broader, like be open to meeting new people. And so he gave me a bit of a shake, really, in terms of my outlook. And I think I've taken a very insular outlook for quite a long time, and now I'm trying to shift it. So I am trying now to say yes to things like this, for example. Right, I got a call the other day to do 5 Live at 5:30 in the morning. I said no to that. So I can't do 5 Live at 5:30 in the morning. What am I going to say at 5:30 in the morning? I'm going to be half asleep. But I'm trying to say yes to these things and get out there and meet a completely new and different type of person. People in different sports, people in different industries, and just open up again. Because I mean, I wouldn't have been in football if someone hadn't opened up to me, right? I owe everything to the likes of Gavin Flegg and guys like this, who took somebody who had no real track record in football and gave them a shot at the very, very top of the world game, right? It was good that Tony did that for me. So I've started small. I've started on LinkedIn and just putting out little posts and being sort of more generous with my time for strangers. And it's led to this, and it's led to other things. So I think it's a good thing. So the principles, I was trying to think, like, I've got quite my outlook is a very, very, like, who's going to want to listen to me? Right? I've got a very humble outlook, right? So it seems a bit kind of, you don't want your peers and your colleagues thinking you're a whopper.
Yeah, I know.
By being out there and posting this stuff. So I thought, well, what would be really helpful? And if it was somebody else, what would they really want to hear and know? So I've kept like a little diary of for every project, every painful thing that I've been through in my career. I've tried to translate into some kind of lesson, some kind of, what did we learn from that? We take bets, right? We take huge bets on players and millions of pounds. I've been in advisory roles with clubs where the total value of the transfer might be 160, 180 million quid. If you look at the wages, the transfer fee, everything, some of the biggest transfers in the world in the last 5 or 10 years, I've been involved in some of them. And the pressures are incredible. What do you learn? What did you get right? What did you get wrong? So I thought, well, if I write those things down, eventually they'll be useful, either to me when I'm old and I need reminding, or to somebody else. So that's what I've started to do. So every week I do one from my list. It's quite a big list. I'm going to be going for a while.
I'm going to ask you what to come. So yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, there's loads. So I do one a week on a Wednesday morning. It's my first job on a Wednesday morning, is just to draft one and put it out there. So pick one that's that really resonates. Let me just I'll open the file actually, and I can.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, one that kind of, I suppose it definitely links to kind of recruitment and transfers would be the fail fast, fail cheap, fail often. That's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah.
And then
fail fast. I mean, that's a classic software one, right? Like, you don't. A lot of the modelling that we've done, for example, I mean, like, I can pick loads of different examples, but if you're going to get it wrong fast and get it wrong cheap.
And then move,
and then move on. So it's a really simple thing to understand, is don't get wedded to. I think a lot of design type thinking comes from big engineering. If you work backwards and go right down into the history of some of this stuff, 1960s, 80s, and so on, a lot of management literature possibly has its roots in like military research. Military research is different to other types, especially American military research, because the pot of funding is so extreme and the continuity of that funding is so extreme that you can afford to work in a very hierarchical top-down way, right? But the reality for the rest of us is we don't live with a constant stream of cash and total patience and all these other elements you need for in a military setting. So a lot of this management literature is really redundant, I think. A lot of it's aging out now, but certainly the stuff that I was kind of forced to read when I was getting my education, you look at now as nonsense, right? And it felt like nonsense at the time. And once you go into a startup setting, you really realize that. So if you're going to fail fast, fail cheap, push to find the failure early. Yeah. Rather than, and I think this is so hard. It's one of the reasons why leaving City made so much sense to me ultimately, was if you're in a political setting where you're going to be judged. So I don't know how many people this helps actually, because unless you're in a startup setting, it's very difficult. But because of these asymmetries we were talking about before, if you've got, let's say you have 10 attempts at something and you get 9 of those attempts wrong, but one of those attempts gives you a return that's 100x. Yeah. In a political setting, you've been wrong 9 out of 10 times. Now, if someone wants your job or they want you to look weak, or they can go to the guy above and say, "Do you know that guy? He's got it wrong 9 out of 10. Yeah. He's got 9 failures there." And if that boss isn't super kind of aware of the dynamics and the risk profile and everything else, they will logically conclude that you're crap at your job. Mm. But actually, if you've managed these asymmetries in the way that I was describing before, none of those 9, if you've had 9 failures and you've not died, you're probably doing something right. Yeah. And if the asymmetry is there on the upside for it to pay for those 10 times over, then crack on. Keep going. Yeah. So that whole fail fast, fail cheap is just a way to get you through, because you're going to be wrong. If you start on the basis of this is wrong, let's get less wrong, you're going to end up somewhere good. Whereas if you take this kind of big picture engineering view, like you can't build a bridge over a valley or something, over a river iteratively. Ironically, the history of aviation is entirely iterative. So fly plane, crash plane, change plane, right, was the way that planes came to be stable and secure. Was you changed them once they crashed because you found out what the flying properties were and you adapted to it. But for a lot of big, heavy engineering, you start with a very clear picture. You stay on the blackboard for a long time and you build it once, right? You can't fail. That doesn't necessarily apply to companies, processes, software, loads, data science development. You won't believe how many times, how many iterations, micro iterations, thousands, to arrive at the quality model that's a big part of what we do. You can't even count how many times that's been wrong, right? Because we do so much automation around the searching for the right solution that we don't even count how many times we get it wrong. But it's in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of times that we've explored different possibilities and tested them to figure out what the right answer is. And you need that process to be cheap, because you can't have a process where failure is terminal, In some businesses it is, right? You look at the guys that launch rockets and stuff, they cost so much to launch. You've only got a finite pot of capital. If you can't get it to orbit within a certain budget, you're done. Yeah. And maybe that's where I'm going to be with the software. Maybe there does come a point where you can't sustain the funding to have another go. I think we're onto something extremely powerful. We've had league title wins, we've had growth, we've had large amounts of money generated in profit from the sale of players, big wins over the last 6 years. But if I can't sustain the cash flow and the capital needed to get the product to where I think it could be, it will die, right? That's the nature of it. So you want to get and that principle is one that I can say I've been guilty of not following enough. I've stayed in the fight too long with some stuff, and I've tried to force it over the line when nature is telling me it's the wrong solution. Yeah. And it's cost me. I've been really lucky that I've been able to bounce back, and it's not been terminal yet. But the big lessons, that's a big one, that one. Do you want to do another one?
Yeah. Do you want to pick, or?
Let me have a go. But you picked a great one, though, to be fair. There's a couple of lovely ones, right? So, like, no emotional decisions is a great one.
Yeah.
How easy is it to make an unemotional decision in football?
Definitely not.
You know, but being able to detach and go back to your basics, go back to your principles, go back to your frameworks, and say, look, we know that player, we love him. He's got a wife and children that come and play at the training ground. Whatever it is, right, that's going to make you emotionally connect and say, right, let's give him another deal, or let's turn a blind eye to a salary increase, and let's give him the bump, whatever it is. Very, very hard to do for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think some of us are better equipped to do that than others. I guess we all live somewhere in the autistic spectrum, and it's easier for some than it is for others.
Yeah.
But to create that break so that you can say, like, what is it we're actually deciding, and then work back through the framework and say, actually, the risk, the yield, all the markers say this is something we should do, the value potential, blah, blah, blah. Let's do it. The logical steps are there to go and do it. And not be led by your emotions, I think, is probably a better way of putting it, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's a huge one. How many decisions do you have to make in a football club before you start to look at the sort of portfolio of players and go, this is going to be really hard to recover from? Like, we're exposed in such a way now that, one injury to one person, we're in real trouble because we made commitments to players we shouldn't have made. I remember listening to Bill Shankly talk about it. He was doing an interview for his autobiography. He was talking about the fact that he got he didn't want to admit it, but he got attached to one of his great Liverpool teams, and he kept them for too long. And when they should have been turning the team over to sustain that kind of winning level, they let that older group stay for too long, and it gave them a much bigger transformation to execute. Now the flip side of that then is when you're integrating the new players, you don't have the old leaders to help that transition because you've let them all age out, they leave, and you don't have that kind of that master and an apprentice thing where you can start to introduce people and preserve the culture. So, if you're emotional, like this is a great example actually. If you're emotional and you connect to a group of players for too long and you let them stay in your squad for too long, the squad becomes imbalanced towards being a bit more senior. It's very difficult to integrate and onboard and develop the next generation of players. And then that means then you can't sustain the kind of level you want to sustain. I think, and pick a team. I'll not name one just in case I upset somebody, but you can do it. Pick a team that's kind of cycled older guys to try and win now. And they've gone, right, well, we'll go and get so-and-so from Real Madrid. We'll go and get so-and-so from PSG, give him one last year. He's 33, and we'll try and win another year. And you have too many of them.
Yeah.
And then they all kind of drop off together and you're like, well, who's going to now lead this talented group to become the kind of players they need to become?
Yeah.
Show them the right behaviors, show them the right disciplines, teach them, enforce it, have the seniority to enforce it. If you've kind of cycled a bunch of mercenaries for a while that haven't got that sense of the club's identity and its culture and its ethos and so on.
Yeah.
So you can see how easy it is to make these decisions on an emotional basis, but also how damaging it can be when you look at something like the composition of a squad.
Yeah, so it's almost like making the task bigger than it needed to be if you did it gradual. But I suppose it always also comes, you got to consider, like, going back to the thing you mentioned that you're doing with VSI, like the head coach, sporting director, the owner, like the head coach, if you sign a player that you're signing them because they're going to maybe have value in 5 years, like the head coach probably doesn't care about that because he's only on a 2-year contract and he could get sacked in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It's kind of aligning what people want, and there's all sorts of different dynamics, isn't there, I suppose? Yeah,
that's massive. And don't get me wrong, like you've got a head, the brutal reality of a head coach's life is that they're in post for 12 months now.
Yeah.
Something like that. So they're a massive stakeholder in the journey for the club, but they're not necessarily the one that's got the best incentives all the time to do the right thing for the club. Now, some of that is about club management. So it's about how that coach is incentivized and how they're rewarded, but also how they're protected. So, you hear a lot of coaches get hired into jobs with a story, and then they lose 3 on the bounce, and that story disappears.
Yeah.
You know, they're right to be hurt by that, because they've been let down by their ownership. They've been let down by the leadership above them, I think. So I think having that really clear vision from an ownership point of view, but then also having the sort of courage and the discipline to stick with it is super important. Otherwise, the coach is going to be like a human shield, right? They're just going to take a hit and be replaced, which is nonsense. I think there's some short-term incentives you can offer as well to help keep the coach more aligned. But I think a lot of it is behaviour and protection for them, like making sure they feel psychologically safe to do the job you've hired them to do, and not just kind of be drawn into win the next game, win the next game, win the next game. Because if you do that at all costs, you will lose something else somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
You know, some of the teams I've been part of, where you squeeze out another year, you squeeze out another year, you squeeze out another year, you do kind of run out of road with that. And then the consequence of that then is you can't easily pivot, because you don't have that continuity of players that you can do that whole succession piece that I was talking about. You're building a new group with a new culture from scratch, and you may be able to do that, by the way. There've been some successful teams in a few leagues that have kind of cycled short-term relationships and done quite well. But for the most part, they run out of road, and those teams don't stay there very long. So that whole ability to sustain a winning level disappears. So very, very delicate, very delicate. But I think this is what this big responsibility on the ownership, right? Is to frame everyone's roles and responsibilities and incentives properly, and then manage the personalities and the pressures properly. You know, so if the coach does start to feel an incredible amount of pressure because they're not winning enough games, take the pressure away. So look, this is what we're trying to do. We're not going to change. Find a new story. It's not going to happen. But unfortunately, you know, we don't live in that world, right? But I think it can happen.
Yeah.
I think it can happen. I think absolutely. I mean, there'll be a lot of coaches who will really love the process of developing players. They love seeing them grow and improve and get stronger and faster and be successful. Like, they're going to look back on their careers, a lot of these guys, and they'll remember things like that.
Yeah, that's right.
They'll remember big moments, winning games, all that sort of stuff, but they will absolutely remember, like, I'm just using your example, you know, where some of those developmental things, they'll stick with them for a long time. So I don't think you have to push too hard on a coach, from what I've seen, to get them to really engage with that. But you do have to create an environment around them where that is acceptable and can happen, and they don't feel exposed and whatever else.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. Well, I look forward to seeing the next Wednesday one, the Wednesday one after that. So I'll link down below in the description, Lee. You're obviously on LinkedIn and stuff. We've spoke about some other kind of episodes here today. I'll link those down below. I'm cautious of time. I'm very appreciative. You know, we've been going 90 minutes now, Lee. So again, very, very grateful of that. So before we do wrap up, I do like to ask everyone that comes on if you have any kind of recommendations for any books or podcasts. It doesn't have to be sports analytics. It can literally be anything, Lee, or anything else that you want to give a shout out to at all.
Immediately off the top of my head, no. I mean, I think there's some great books out there that are worth reading that will definitely chime in with a lot of the stuff I've put on LinkedIn. So I think Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said is a really cool book that covers lots of interesting stuff. I think you could do a lot worse than read a lot of what's been written by Nassim Taleb. To be honest, I think the guy's a beast in terms of the modelling and the understanding of risk and various different sort of quantitative dynamics that exist within different concepts. You know, he talks very well, but he also actually mathematically has a lot to offer as well. So I think he's a real icon in that space. They're the first two that jump straight to mind. So I think you do something. Anyone who reads their stuff is going to come out of that book, and anything that Nassim's done is going to come out thinking I'm enriched in some way.
Yeah, perfect. Nice one. Well, Lee, thanks very much. I really appreciate your time, as I mentioned. I look forward to seeing how Mud Analytics progresses and seeing more of your posts on LinkedIn. So, thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.